right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show, your one-stop shop for all things Commanders. Make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss an episode like today's episode with Ben Standig from The Athletic. Ben, thanks for being on. How are you doing, buddy?
Doug, I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Another draft cycle in the books for you. A couple of things. I know that you put your hat in the ring every year for the mock draft competition, if you will. How did you fare this year?
Oh, eh, middle of the pack, ordinary. I mean, obviously, like everybody else, the top of the draft ended up being a bit of a mess. I was happier with my Commanders guesses than I was my first round
Okay.
guesses. I'll say that.
Now that it's over, did you hear whispers during the draft that you thought might come true, Commanders wise, that didn't, or whispers that you thought a certain player was going somewhere and they went in a different direction?
Um, I
While I
mean, not so.
realize that the front office is very tight-lipped around there, I recognize that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they obviously they didn't make any trades. That they were pretty straightforward. I mean, not really. I mean, could there have been another player that they would have taken over Josh Connerly? Sure, I guess. But Ezeraku was sitting there. They didn't take him, for the notion of them taking a pass rusher. So not really. I mean, to me, you mentioned the mock draft. I mean, I think to some degree we get caught up in the individual players, which is, especially in a year in which the variation between the top, the 10th pick and like the 50th pick wasn't considered to be that dramatic. It's pretty hard. But you look at the actual areas that they got: offensive tackle, cornerback, receiver / returner, the fastest linebacker at the combine, and running back. Like all those are pretty logical areas. Like none of that was surprising. If they had gone, a different position, that could have been more interesting, but not really. I mean, like I said, Connerly was somebody that I talked about, for sure. You just don't know where he's going to go. Lane and Madrana were two guys I had mocked to Washington in my my sort of final mock drafts, so that wasn't surprising. And Amos, was just like what cornerback could be there in round two. He seemed to be projected to go earlier, so wasn't necessarily somebody I was thinking about at 61. But I don't like you said, between the fact that they are pretty tight with information, but also just I don't think anything that crazy. I don't overly newsy for me, at least in terms of what they almost did.
They took Josh Connerly. Simmons was there. I think a lot of people in the space, if you will, thought Simmons was the better prospect. I've talked to a bunch of NFL draft Nick guys that said if Connerly Jr. had gone back, he's only 21 years old. If he'd gone back for another year, put on the weight, maybe he's a top 5, top 10 pick last year. I think people thought maybe it was a put on as how excited they were, but they're really pumped about this pick, and it helps them in two ways, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure they're pretty happy about it. I don't know if there's a put on. I mean, obviously everybody with every team says they got the guy they wanted. They got the guy at the top of their draft board. I mean, sure. I mean, if I'm fifth in line for fast, in a fast food draft, and I get Wendy's, I'm going to be like, you know what? That's what I wanted all along. Chick-fil-A, screw that. I wanted Wendy's. So it is what it is on that front. To me, the Connerly pick made a lot of sense. I go back to the combine, and I was asking Peters and Quinn, is Brandon Coleman the left tackle? And their answers said to me, no, because they didn't say he was, which, you would think it would be simple if he was. Okay, so that means they're going to get a tackle. They obviously go get Tunsil. And so if they're willing to move him once, Coleman, well, they might be willing to do it again. I mean, it's not like right tackle is demonstratively easier than left tackle. It's just the blind side, so it's a little more valuable in that regard. So it figured that, hey, they may in fact decide to go get another tackle. This was a year where there was a pretty thin tackle class, and Connerly and Simmons were like kind of the last two guys that went fairly high or typically projected to go that high. So I think it makes sense there, and also, if there's a world where Laramie Tunsil only ends up being here for a couple of years, there's no extension or just things don't work out, then you have a young guy to go there. But ultimately, at the end of the day, helping Jaden Daniels one way or another is the move to make, and that's what they did. So, Simmons had a knee injury. That's probably a big reason why he slid all the way to where he slid. It's an obvious comparison for Washington. I don't know where they were on the medicals with him. I know a lot of people thought Simmons was really impressive, but like you said, from a longer term perspective, Connerly might have been viewed sort of in the same way if he'd waited another year. So they got ahead early. And, to me, it makes a lot of sense. The logic we'll see about, the player ultimately.
I popped this question up from the chat just because it was one thing I was going to ask you. Like, I think most people thought 29 was surefire DN. They needed the help. Last year, Fowler Jr. led the team in sacks. The unit was 11th, which I don't think anybody would have suspected going into the season. Are we more concerned as fans about the DN position than the guys picking players and making the front office decisions?
Well, definitely that,
Yes.
which doesn't necessarily make it wrong. It's just that's, clearly they are not as pressed. I mean, they didn't add, there's basically no real like edge athletic guy. There's really no youth. I mean, except for Javonte Jean-Baptiste, a 7th round pick a year ago. We all point to Fowler's 10.5 sacks, but I think the bigger thing with Fowler to point to is that he basically got benched in the NFC Championship game because of concerns with his overall game, and that's why I don't think they were fine if he were to move on. So I think that's notable. Look, the run defense was the real issue last year. They made moves in that direction. Dietrich Wise will be a better run defender than Fowler. Javon Kinlaw is expected to play some on the edge. So they addressed it in that way. They didn't necessarily address the pass rusher aspect. And, here's the rub. Like, I get it that because they won 12 games and made the NFC Championship game, we're looking at them like, how does a team that just did all that build on top of that and get past the Eagles and so on? The reality is it's still only the second year of this fix. Like the roster has a lot of holes, or did before the offseason started. I kept asking the question late last year, how good are they? Like, are we sure they're really good? Like, obviously Jaden was really good and they kept winning games, but they were winning games of the last play. They faced a bunch of quarterbacks who were just terrible for the most part. So it's not that they weren't winning, but it's just like, okay, they still have a lot of holes. This is still a team that was, had the second pick, coming off the 2023 season. And look, they've improved a ton at cornerback on paper. They've improved a ton on the line on paper, on the offensive line. If Deebo Samuel works out, then they've got a bigger upside at receiver, etc. Defensive end is an area they still don't have that sort of key figure, but I think they think between Armstrong, Wise, whatever they use for Kinlaw, hopefully they get a healthier Cleveland Farrell. He had 2 sacks the first 2 games last year, and then it just kind of faded out. But he was on the injury report basically every week. I'm not saying he's going to get 10 sacks. I'm just saying, like, he was off to a decent start, and then he was just constantly banged up. So that's what I think they're hopeful for. I don't know if they're right, but that's what they're hopeful for. And I would just say, in terms of the draft, like, I imagine on some level they were wanting to take an edge, and it's a deep class. And I imagine that each time they may have thought, well, we like this other guy better, so let's take this other position. We'll get that later. And then all of a sudden you get to a point where, like, well, now what? Now, when you get to like the 6th and 7th round, it's just who's the best player. The position almost kind of doesn't matter at that point. So, it didn't happen. But, if they didn't draft Lane and took an edge instead, we'd be like, well, wait, don't they need speed on offense? If they didn't take Amos, in light of today's news that George Pickens is going to Dallas and all the other teams have good defensive backs, would we be saying, hey, how come they don't have more corners? So you can't solve all the problems, and we'll see what happens. I think they're still light at edge, but I don't know. And I saw the question also. Part of that was about like, are they going to get somebody else?
Right.
I don't really know that there's anything else out there. I mean, everybody else is out there is like somebody who's like over 30. Zadarius Smith had 9.5 sacks. Sure, but like I think 32 teams are probably thinking something similar. So the odds of Washington getting him seem light. And beyond that, everybody else is, like I said, just an older guy who's not really going to help the cause unless there's injuries, or they just think, hey, we got a real value out there that we can take advantage of. Let's just do it. But I think we're probably looking at what they're going to have.
You mentioned earlier about how well things had to go down the stretch last year to get us to where we were, and then taking like a real look at what the roster was and how they achieved that and how they're to continue to achieve that kind of success. I'd say it is as well as things bounced last year. AP's 1-year deals last year, other than the corner Michael Davis, like were all but hits. And again, and I get why it's necessary to do this, because the roster was so far back, because you have so many first round and second round picks from the previous regime that aren't getting new contracts. You had to play this game. But good Lord, I mean, if Adam Peters goes Yahtzee again this year on 1-round picks, it would be just another amazing outcome for a trend that most teams don't want anything to do with.
Yeah, for sure. I was looking at the 2026 salary cap data on over the cap, and I think Washington right now is like the 6th highest projected effective cap space, which it's May. It doesn't mean anything yet. But my point is like, okay, so we're going to spend months as well saying, oh, hey, they're going to have all this cap space to play with. So it goes both ways. You can't have the cap space to play with if you're signing guys to multi-year deals. And yeah, and to your point, like the 1-year deals, it's why I think you have to look at this roster in the context of a team that is still building, because they're having to do that, like you said, because they don't, they had 3 and 4 years worth of drafts where almost nothing happened. I mean, positive. And they a lot of teams were exercising 5th-year options this year. So Washington didn't have to worry about that because they won't have to for a few more years, at least based on their own players. So yeah, it's not ideal, but it's what they kind of need to do to get some immediate help. And like you said, Peters pretty much nailed everything last year. They got, Javon Kinlaw was on a 1-year deal, but that's obviously a huge one. The trade for Deebo Samuel is a guy on a 1-year deal. How big is that? How much is he going to work out? That's going to be a huge question. Obviously, some of the defensive linemen, Dietrich Wise, Jonathan Jones in the secondary, et cetera. So, they're going to have a few of these guys that they're still going to need to hopefully hit on to make this thing work. But I think that's the one thing I do wonder with Peters. Like he said that if Connerly was there, they weren't going to trade down. And I guess he felt the same. He said the same thing with Trey Amos. I wonder what those opportunities to trade down were, because it feels like that's the only thing that for me is the bigger question, is they didn't get more picks either for this year or for next year when they also only have 5, because they still need more young pieces. I mean, they were like the 6th or 7th oldest team in the league last year. Right now, I think they're going to be projecting to be in the general same area. They need to get younger, but that's through the draft, and it takes time. It's not just 1 year. So that's the only thing I sort of like was there any opportunity to make a trade down? But obviously, they felt the players who were available to them were just worth it to keep the pick.
And the 5 players that they picked, minus the linebacker, I think have chances to immediately have an impact on the team, even if Lane is just the kick returner and he replaces Crowder in that role, feels like an upgrade. If the pick at Amos, again, like the first pick, it theoretically upgrades 2 spots because you get Sandwistrel back inside, where I think everybody kind of feels that's where they want him. And the very last pick in the draft, Bill, I think, has got a chance to crack this roster. Buddy of mine from Fantasy Pro said, maybe he's the Bucky Irving of this year. Give him 4 or 5 years to work in, and you're not going to be able to keep them off the field. So while they only took five, the five that they took, I think, have an opportunity to make a real impact. And then when you consider that they had 9 picks last year, technically, your last 2 years, they've had their full 7 of allotment. If anything, it would have been nice to pick up a pick for next year.
Right. That's certainly a line that Adam Peters threw out. And, it's not wrong. And obviously, I'm sure if Ben Sinnott or Luke McCaffrey or Jordan McGee are more of an impact this year than they were last year for a variety of reasons, that we will play the game of, well, they're kind of part of the 2025 draft and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, there is something to that for sure. Damn, I forgot. You said something interesting I was going to comment on, and now I forgot because I have a memory of
that never
of
happens.
a mouse.
Look, I so rarely have something interesting to say. How does Sinnott get on the field? How does Sinnott get on the field this year?
I don't know, to be super honest. I mean, assuming good health.
Same situation as last year, right? Like, how are you able to get this guy looking more like a day 2 player?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I wouldn't tell fantasy football players to put him on your sleeper list because, again, unless Zach Ertz gets hurt, I don't know how he's going to be on the field consistently. I mean, look, he was the guy that caught the Tress Way pass on in the playoff game last year. So it's not like it's not a knock on Sinnott. It's just more that Ertz had obviously a spectacular year last year, certainly exceeded all expectations by a bazillion. And John Bates, is one of the better blocking tight ends, was rewarded with the contract that he got. And, I don't know how much 3 tight end offense they're going to go with. So I just don't know how much there is to, for him to go. By the way, just to go back to your saying that the 5 draft picks should have impact other than maybe Medrano. I think he could, I get it. We don't really count special teams to some degree. We count the returner. We don't count the guy running down the field. But this is an area where I do think he can help. And I do wonder, the reason I identified him as somebody I thought would make sense for them is because he ran the fastest 40 at the combine. And we talk about speed on offense. The defense needed speed as well. I mean, that was, part of the reason why Saquon Barkley and other running backs were getting a lot of yards is they just didn't have enough, pursuit speed out there. And a guy like that does. Now, again, how does he get on the field? Similar question we're having sort of with Ben Sinnott. But I'm just saying, I think he's got a real shot to help in different ways as well. But yeah, but that's the thing. Like Sinnott, McCaffrey, McGee, I don't know how any of them are necessarily getting on the field more. McCaffrey could be the kick returner. I'm not saying it's impossible, but and he may, maybe at receiver, maybe he stays ahead of Lane unless they just say, hey, we got to get that 4.34 speed on the field somewhere. But, again, like, is Noah Brown or Debo going to stay healthy all year? That's a huge question. If not, then there's room for McCaffrey. But if not, it could be, again, we may be waiting until 2026 to see him really get a real shot. McGee, unless Bobby Wagner misses time, how is he going to get on the field? And we talked about Sinnott. So, that's the other part is like the draft it's not always about the immediate return, but at the same point, you want to see the path to get there. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that there's not an obvious path, but that's just the reality right now.
Interesting nugget. It took Ertz on the Cardinals getting hurt before Kingsbury would get Trey McBride on the field, also a 3rd-round pick. So I don't know, weird circular action there for that. In fact, I think that was the game against the Commanders, the opening game of that series. Ben, I'm curious. You've been with this team through what feels like the downs. Now are the ups. I'd like to say ups and downs. It's downs and ups, I suppose. They have quickly become the darlings of the league. Has it made your job busy? Are you now in more demand to go talk with people as the Commanders become more and more popular across the league?
Well, certainly at points last year when Jaden was, the talk of the league and they're making the playoff run, certainly that was a team that everybody wanted to talk about, whatever the market was or nationally. Ironically, I think this offseason they were pretty boring. I mean, they made the Tunsil trade and they made the Debo trade, but like in general, like like I see fans constantly saying, "Boy, the ESPN and the NFL Network, they must hate the Commanders because they never talked about them." They kind of didn't. I mean, their pick, they didn't make trades. Their picks were pretty straightforward. They didn't make any picks. You're like, "Oh wow, what the hell was that?" They weren't involved in any Shador Sanders and stuff, so they were kind of boring. So I think in this offseason, there hasn't been as much to talk about again, other than the Tunsil and Samuel, which I'm not saying it's nothing, but it's once we got the 2 days, 3 days past that, it kind of went away. So I imagine once we get closer to we get to training camp, we get to the season, then there'll be a discussion more about who's going to challenge the Eagles in the NFC. Washington will be an obvious candidate, and look, I think there's reasons to be concerned this year in terms of are they going to be able to duplicate what they did last year, whether that's because of the schedule being harder or just more bad luck to some degree just kind of befalls them. But at the same point, Jaden Daniels, who he's only ascending as far as we know, and if he keeps ascending, who knows what's going to happen. And they did make the offense around him better in theory, with Tunsil and Debo, so and Connerly. So look, if the offense is able to do what it did last year and then some, we may be talking again about one of the most exciting teams in the league week in and week out, and a team that's a contender. But we'll have to see how that unfolds. You can't predict the bounce of the ball, so to speak. But and once we get closer to the season, I think my phone will probably start ringing a little bit more.
I was thinking about this the other day. I wonder how different Cliff's offense in year 2 will look, not just because of his familiarity with Jaden and Terry, but you've upgraded the line, which I think hindered them as far as what they wanted to do last year. The ball had to come out so fast and so many different times. It's hard to pump the ball down the field if somebody's in your face every 2 seconds. So I wonder how different the offense could and will look, and how much of the playbook they scrapped last year just because they didn't feel comfortable with the pressure set up for Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, I mean, I think the second half of the year, really kind of during that the winning streak at the end of the year, like they lost 3 in a row, and then they bounced back at the end. The run game just stopped working, and I think part of that was Austin Eckler being out took away that. He's not really changing pace, but like
Yes.
that wiggle, that swervability that he has, the ability to catch passes. And then Robinson was just super inconsistent in how much they put on that on the line. Maybe the fact that they added 2 tackles says something, and could move Coleman inside to guard. Maybe that says something. But I think they lost the balance. I mean, the only run game they really had for down the stretch was Jaden Daniels. And, that's a weapon. You want to take advantage of it, but you don't want to necessarily have to, like that Atlanta game. To me, that was the game where he felt the most like an NBA superstar, where it was just like, give me the ball, I'll figure it out, and he just sort of took over. So I do wonder. I mean, not that Tunsil is considered to be a dynamic run blocker. He is not.
Mhm.
He's much better at pass blocking, but still, he should be, better. And look, if Coleman ends up at left guard, I can't sit here and say he's going to be better than Allegretti, but he'll have a higher ceiling. Does that help? And then if Connerly's able to come in, they're going to miss Cosme, presumably at least at the start of the season. So I do wonder about getting more balance to help Jaden. But yeah, I mean, he's going to have. I guess it's such a weird deal because he's so mobile and he's so smart. It's not like, I mean, the pressure is problematic and bothersome, but he was so smooth at dealing with it. I do think though, and I've meant to look this up this offseason, but I haven't yet. The reason I was thinking that Coleman was going to potentially get moved was because it just felt like so many times, even if he wasn't giving up a sack, which he did give up a few, like it just always felt when Jaden got pressured immediately, it was coming. After the Pro Bowl or not, that should not happen as much. And yeah, just that alone should give Jaden Daniels more time, and therefore give Cliff Kingsbury more options. But I think Cliff kind of calls what he calls, and Jaden's smart enough to know when he needs to stay in the pocket and when he needs to take off. And that's I don't think that's going to change in terms of Cliff's thinking.
The wide receiver market has exploded. Terry's up for an extension. When do you think that will happen? And good God, Ben, what does it look like?
Right. Well, as they say, deadlines create deals. The OTAs are not necessarily a deadline because it's voluntary, but we know how that kind of voluntary deal works. But he missed time in was it 2022? He missed time that year, that offseason because of the contract. So, somewhere in that general OTA start of mandatory minicamp range to me would be the logical assumption. And as far as what he gets, I mean, DK Metcalf, he signed about $30 million, I want to say, annually.
Yeah, maybe just a little over.
There's like a bump, there's like a gap between what's that?
I said I thought just a little bit over, but
Yeah,
yes,
DK's
right.
rent.
Yeah.
Yeah, about there. Like, there's a couple guys behind, a little bit below DK. Then there's the guys who are ahead of him. I feel like using DK as sort of a marker. So yeah, like a little over 30 annually. That to me seems logical. The only question, I guess, is he's going to be 30, which is crazy that Terry McLaurin's already going to be there, but he came in the league a little bit older than normal than some of these other guys. So other than that, what else is there to say? Highly productive, excellent locker room guy, does all the right things. So there's no reason that you wouldn't pay up for that. So to me, the $30 million mark, somewhere in that range, seems like the way to go. And he signed a 3-year deal last time. Maybe he's cool with that again, because it would, in theory, mean he gets back to the market quicker, than if it's longer years. But at the same point, you're getting past 30. You never know. So, I think that makes somewhere around that range makes sense. You never assume anything, but like I can't even imagine a world where this doesn't get done. He represents, like I said, everything they are trying to establish themselves as, what it means to be a commander, all that stuff. I don't know how you can do better than what he does. He helps Jaden Daniels, and he's a excellent guy, seemingly on and off the field. So I think it gets done. It's been quiet, obviously, but there's a lot else going on, and again, there's no real pressure to do anything. We've got a few more weeks before that happens.
Well, we've got our crystal ball out here, Ben. What's the chance that they see Tunsil long term, or they play him out the next couple of years and then move Connolly Jr. over to left tackle, draft a right tackle, and that way you're not paying the left tackle $100 million some dollars? Or do you think they see Tunsil as a guy that can play left tackle for them for the next 5 years?
Well, based on what they gave up, I can't imagine they think it's just the next 2 years and then they move on. I mean, I know they made the trade before they drafted Connerly, but you have to at least consider that could happen. So, I would imagine there's some kind of extension. I guess the question is it like 2 years extension, or is it like something more than that? I mean, he's making good money already, but there's always more money to make. That's a position that's always in value. So, it's also interesting. He's his own agent, so there's no like I may have even asked him about his when he got his first time he talking to us. It was like, hey, did you talk about a contract? He goes, yeah, they know where I'm at. He didn't tell us what that meant. I can't imagine it meant I'm cool, with this, and we'll play it out. I would imagine he's going to want something. So, again, it's not enough to make the trade, and then he walks in 2 years, and you're like, okay, well, that's that. I mean, you would think that logically, if you're make that trade, you're going to give up those picks, and again, whatever year it'll be for Tunsil, Jaden Daniels will be like a 4th-year player, a 5th-year player. Like, that's still like early in his career. You're still going to want to protect him throughout his whole career. So, like I said, as long as they think he's healthy and he's a good fit based on whatever they see, he could get, I could imagine he could get an extension or a new deal completely by week 1, midway through the season, before the end of the year. I think it just depends on how each group wants to sort of attack it. Do you want to wait and see what happens and then play it out, or just get it over with? And maybe that means taking less for Tunsil rather than waiting and seeing, if he really crushes it. So I would imagine he's here for more than just the 2 years, one way or the other.
I saw your Twitter poll, I think it was today, about who you rather have, Pickens or Debo. I could have told you which way that was gonna go. You know me, I'm
Yeah,
a Georgia homer. You know where I stand on all things Georgia. So I tell you who I would have picked. Who would you have rather had, Debo for a fifth or Pickens for a third?
um, I guess based on that, I would have to say Debo. I mean, especially considering they already gave up a second and a fourth.
That's right.
They
That's
can't.
true.
I mean, that the third is, they don't have a ton left for next year. So I mean, obviously Debo the fifth was already for this year, so that's already gone. But a Debo. I mean, look, the Pickens obviously has the bigger upside, younger player. He's one of the better deep ball receivers in the league right now. And Debo, when he's been right, has been a tremendous playmaker. But last year he wasn't right. He's had some injuries, and he's got the type of game and body where, when the downside hits, it's gonna, I think, kind of go quickly. He's not a natural running receiver. He's the kind of guy you need to use out of the backfield and get the ball in certain ways. And if he's not able to sort of overpower defensive backs or run past linebackers to a degree, then he really loses his value. So I'm a little concerned there, but a fifth round pick, Adam Peters knows him. I'm going to roll the dice there rather than give up a third, even though, Pickens has got the clear, greater potential, but obviously the combustible factor, in general, if Pittsburgh's getting rid of receiver, tread lightly would be based on history. So that would also make me nervous. So yeah, I guess I would go Debo, but draft pick aside and team aside, Pickens is obviously, I think, the better upside.
Ben, you're from the district, you live in the district. I'm curious your thoughts on all the news about the stadium coming. I know it's not a done deal. Feels like that train's too far down the tracks to go backwards now. And obviously the NFL draft, which I think will be really cool if it's set up on the mall the way I think it will be. So just as a guy, I guess two ways. As a guy that covers the team, I'm curious your thoughts. And I'm curious your thoughts of a guy that is a lifelong Washingtonian.
Yeah, I was born in DC. I'm not a taxpayer at the moment. I mean, I pay taxes, but in Maryland. Okay, so I mean, from the team perspective, look, obviously we all get it. The stadium formerly known as FedEx Field, Northwest Stadium, was not great. Needs to be replaced. We all get that. And to Josh Harris's credit, they're trying to put lipstick on the pig now while people still have to deal with it, and they're trying to move as quickly as they can to get this going. It obviously would make a lot of sense to put it in DC in terms of the bigger events and the Monday Night Football pictures of all the buildings there, and all that would be great. I have been on the side of it that, I'm not smart enough to know the ultimate economic impact. My only question has been, when they built Cap One, and I was there before Cap One was there, and Chinatown was a ghost town, how it impacted that area. But it also it was directly connected to the rest of downtown. There's no, if you're new and didn't know anything, you wouldn't know that Chinatown is relatively new to the rest of the downtown area. It's seamlessly there. Navy Yard, not as much, but not that far away either, in terms of it's right there, off the roads. You're right by Capitol Hill. I just think that the RFK site, I mean, unless they're going to completely change the neighborhoods between RFK and Capitol Hill, I mean, it's not necessarily an area where people want to go. Are you really going to get people to go there significantly enough? Not just on game days. There's only going to be, I know they said 200 dates, but get to 50 and I would be impressed, let alone of significant dates, not random events. I just don't know. Are we really going to generate enough traffic? But look, the city seems to think it will. Even the people who've been the most loudest proponents, City Council Chair Phil Mendelson, he's basically saying, look, I'm in favor of the project. I'm not in favor of the terms. So I think ultimately this does get done. my bigger concern is like somehow does the federal government, does the White House, does anybody in those factions get involved and potentially scuttle things like where the DC is still waiting to get their 2026 budget set up and all that. But I think ultimately it gets done. If they're, it would be great for the city. I hope it works out. That's all I can say in terms of the neighborhood. The stadium is great for those of us who only care about that, 10 Sundays a year, kind of. But that's the city has bigger thoughts, and they're going to have to, if they think it's going to make sense, so be it. That would be my question.
Before we get out of here, Ben, I was hoping you'd give me 2-3 minutes on what the Wizards' best hopes are for Monday. Obviously, picking one is the hope, but it's such a random.
Is the lottery's
thing.
Monday?
I believe it's Monday.
Yeah, it's Monday. I didn't even. As Doug knows, because yesterday I showed up for this podcast because I don't know what the day of the week are, so I didn't even realize. I know it's next week. I didn't realize it was Monday. I mean, look, everybody's saying it's like there's Cooper Flagg, the 2 Rutgers kids, and then VJ Edgecombe. What a great name. Those 4 guys seem to be the ones you'd be pretty happy with. I don't know enough about Edgecombe. The fact that the 2 Rutgers guys were on one team and they couldn't make the tournament scares me because that's what happened with Markelle Fultz and Ben Simmons. But okay, I get it. They're very talented individually. We'll see. But yeah, to me, it's I don't say Cooper Flagg or bust, but that would be such the home run hit. I mean, not the the hype on Cooper Flagg is probably a bit high. From what I've seen, I don't see him coming in and being the one guy who completely reshapes an organization, but he's smart. He knows how to play. He can shoot. He seems to be tough enough. And, they've already added enough younger guys where, if you tack on Flagg to Alex Sarr, to Bub Carrington, et cetera, like it starts getting pretty interesting pretty quick to the point where if all those guys over the next year develop, the Wizards could by 2026, 2027, maybe find themselves in position to make a move to get that veteran player, that all-star player who can really sort of help raise the stakes. But a long way to go from that. It's promising. You have to like what they did last year, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the embrace of the tank, and then understanding how to use that cap space that you don't care about. And to take on other people's problems, to take to take on vets, to trade guys for future stuff. All that has just made total sense. And by the way, long way to go, but they got very lucky with the Memphis, Memphis pick. They taking on Marcus Smart's contract. At the time, Memphis was going to be picking in the deep 20s. Instead, it goes all the way up to 18. And now, they still have future picks involving Phoenix and Milwaukee, and those picks could be pretty nice because of, we'll see if Giannis is with the Bucks and the Suns will blow things up. So, the lottery is such a random crapshoot. Who the hell knows? I mean, they could end up picking 6th this week. I mean, God forbid, knock on wood, but that's the game. But I like the direction they're going in. If they get Cooper Flagg, then you really get excited.
The NBA is such a weird space to live in with all the different intricacies and rules. And I lied, but I have one more before we get out of here. Are you going to have to use your passport to cover the Commanders this year?
Sure.
You think so?
I mean, you would think so logically.
Madrid.
The one thing I was wondering is, and I don't know, but Jaden Daniels was over what he was in. Where was he this offseason? He was in. Was he in France?
Yes, he was at the Louvre. I saw that. He's probably been everywhere, but
right.
Yeah,
so I guess I was like,
what?
I mean, look, he can go on vacation. Right, he can go on vacation, but it felt like that was something else. So I don't know if that is anything. It could be 0, but look, the Miami game or the Chargers. The Miami's in Spain. That's the one I would prefer if I'm going to travel rather than going to Brazil, because Brazil's presumably going to be week 1, and that's just a tough way to start a season for me. I don't care about the team. I don't know. I mean, you would think so logically, but I don't know. For some reason, I'm not ready to commit that it's 100% happening. But again, it's been forever. The league clearly wants to promote Washington in a lot of different ways. So we'll see. But I don't know. Maybe there's a reason to wait a year so it's closer to the draft and to help cross promote those two things. I don't know. But yeah, definitely a strong possibility. Get your passports ready just in case.
What's coming up next on the podcast?
Well, I talked to Logan Paulson the other day, and part 2 of that conversation is coming up probably by the time people see this, and just keep plugging away. Obviously, rookie minicamp starts this weekend. We'll be out there Friday at least, and first look at that, and first chance to well, not first chance, but actually, yeah, first chance to hear from Dan Quinn since the draft. He didn't talk at the draft, and
Okay.
obviously our first chance to see in person Connerly and Amos and all those guys. So, I'll be talking about whatever's going on out there as well on the Last Man Standing podcast.
All right, Ben, I appreciate you, brother. Always have a good time when you come on. All the best to you, man.
Doug, always appreciate you asking. Thanks for having me.
All right, bud.